Hey everybody, how's it going? Hope you're having a lovely day. Welcome to today's episode of How You Getting Fucked. I'm your host, Louis Rossman. Today we're going to be discussing House Bill 2321 in the state of Washington and why this is bad for ownership in general. My channel goes over the revocation of ownership on a regular basis, whether we're talking about 3D printers that now require authentication schemes if you want to be able to use some of the same programs and features that you had before, or we're talking about thermostats that no longer work unless you buy the new one, or we're talking about other thermostats, or when the company goes bankrupt and somebody takes it over, they just decide to send out a firmware update that says if you want to use all the same features you had before, you got to pay us over $100 a year. The problem nowadays with everything connecting to the internet and having to authenticate with the manufacturer's servers is you can pay $400 for a baby monitor, and if you want everything to work again, they have the ability to just say, here, you have to pay us every month or it's not going to work. When I read this law, I'm not going to be reading it as a 3D printer enthusiast, nor am I going to be reading it as a lawyer. I'm going to be reading it as an ownership enthusiast. So this bill is about firearms and unlawful manufacturing of firearms. And regardless of whether you think that there should or should not be a Second Amendment in the United States, regardless of your position on ghost guns, there are some provisions in this that just go above and beyond and have the ability to give the manufacturers the excuse to ruin the 3D printing experience and also to brick 3D printers when they become older or when the manufacturer decides we just want you to buy a new one that I'm not a fan of at all. So this is an act relating to the preventing of unlawful manufacturing of firearms by requiring 3D printers be equipped with certain blocking technologies, adding a new chapter to Title 19. So let's read some of the parts that are described what's going on here. So equipped with blocking features means a three-dimensional printer has an integrated software control process that deploys a firearms blueprint detection algorithm such that those features identify and reject print requests for firearms or illegal firearm parts with a high degree of reliability and cannot be overridden or otherwise defeated by a user with significant technical skill. Section 6.1, it says that it must prevent a user with significant technical skill from bypassing the algorithm. So this means that root access to your device has essentially become illegal. And if we're talking about just many of the open source firmware options that exist out there, like Marlin or Clipper, this now becomes illegal because, I mean, if you're able to flash your 3D printer with a piece of open source software, even if the software came with restrictions, you could easily remove them. And because of the GPL nature of the software, that means that even if somebody comes out with a version of the software that has these restrictions in place, they're required to also show you the version that doesn't. Like the license code of that software that many people are using right now fundamentally makes complying with this impossible. A three-dimensional printer means any machine capable of rendering a three-dimensional object from a digital design file using additive manufacturing, or any machine capable of making three-dimensional modifications to an object from a digital design file using subtractive manufacturing. Are we talking about CNC mills, lathes, laser cutters, water jet cutters? How many different types of machines are going to be affected by this other than just a 3D printer that somebody buys in their house? The Attorney General, in consultation with research institutions, government agencies, or any other organization the Attorney General deems appropriate, shall adopt rules and regulations to establish standards for equipping a printer with the blocking feature required by this section and for providing the attestation required by this section. The Attorney General may adopt rules and regulations for any other processes the Attorney General deems necessary to carry out the provisions of this chapter. What this means is that the Attorney General can expand what gets blocked without actually having to pass new legislation. Lovely. Every natural person who violates Section 3 of this Act shall, for a first offense, be guilty of a misdemeanor, and for second or subsequent offense, be guilty of a Class C felony, which can be up to 5 years in prison, or a $15,000 fine for flashing your 3D printer with open source firmware. Lovely. Section 6. For purpose of this chapter, a software control process satisfies the blocking feature requirement only if it effectively rejects print requests for firearms or illegal firearm parts with a high degree of reliability, and if it prevents a user with significant technical skill from bypassing a digital firearm manufacturing code detection algorithm and thereby subverting the software process. Software control process may be integrated into a 3D printer's design in any of the following design forms. And C is the one that I dislike the most. Handshake authentication design. Limitation of a 3D printer's operation to accept geometric code for printing only from specified slicers or other preprint software, wherein the printer will require a digital watermark or other authentication tool verifying the identity of the preprint software, and only if that preprint software has integrated firearms bullet print detection algorithm qualified by the Attorney General under subsection 4 of the section, such that any stereolithography file or other computer-aided design file must be screened by the algorithm before the software will proceed to produce geometric code, and such that the software will not produce geometric code for files that are identified by the algorithm as directing the printer to print firearms or illegal firearm parts. So the 3D printer has a handshake with a server. What happens when the server gets turned off? What happens when that server gets updated and is no longer compatible with the older firmware on the non-supported 3D printer? Something that is very concerning is that there are no end-of-life provisions here. What happens when that 3D printer stops getting updates? What happens when the manufacturer updates their server but is no longer updating the firmware for that 3D printer? Does it just not print anything anymore? Sorry, we can't tell if this can detect guns or not, so I guess your $8,000 3D printer you bought a few years ago is dead. Fuck that. We have enough of that shit already. You see where this is going, right? We didn't want you to have to buy a new 3D printer every year. That's not what we would ever do. We're a good company. But look at House Bill 2321. You have to. I didn't want to do it to you. I would love for your 3D printer to last forever. It's that damn government that made us do this. You're allowing manufacturers that are already looking for every single excuse to fuck their customers in the ass and force them to upgrade on a 1 to 3 year cycle the ability to point to somebody else and say it was their fault. No, fuck that. These are global companies. They're not going to implement a special design for Washington. You could connect to a VPN to pretend that you're not in Washington. You could buy it to a PO box in another state and then go and pick it up or have them forward it to you. There's no way to enforce this at the state level. It is impossible. These companies would either have to not sell in the state of Washington, which might be a good idea, or they would have to put this lock into everything that they sell. And now they have an excuse to be able to say, well, I know you bought this thing for $8,000, but that's 4 years old. Don't you want the newest model? Yeah, I know you like that 3D printer, but the processor and software inside of it doesn't support our new authentication system. If this bill passes, the manufacturer will actually have the ability to blame the state when that happens and pretend that it wasn't what they wanted all along. This is a bad fucking idea. We live in a world where fucking baby monitors are getting bricked and turned into subscriptions when the company decides they want to turn off the server or make more money. And you want to put into the law that you have to have all of these detection algorithms that are going to be changing with time. Keep in mind, this must be kept up to date. If there are new designs, if there are new shapes that are found, if the algorithm is found to have not been good enough, this is only going to work if you have the device connecting to an authentication server on a regular basis. And if you're going to do that, you're going to see the company make the same fucking excuse that they've made many times before. These companies have made this excuse anytime they simply wish to make more money, and they've gotten away with it. But now you're giving them the excuse that they need to do this for the safety of society. You don't want people to be murdered by ghost guns, do you? We have to obsolete this printer every year and a half. You don't understand. We need the new CPU for the new AI detection algorithm. No. This is a bad fucking idea. It is going to take the planned obsolescence that we already have, where companies are not even pretending it has anything to do with safety or security, and make it worse because you're giving them the actual fucking excuse. You're giving them everything they need to be able to say that they are doing this for people's safety. Your $5,000 3D printer that you bought a couple of years ago doesn't work anymore because it doesn't support the new detection algorithm, or it can't connect to our server, or the only way for it to connect to our server is if it works with the new firmware because our server now uses some new stuff, and we can't do that for a product we made 3 years ago. No, it's a bad fucking idea. We don't need the government to give 3D printer manufacturers excuses to try and lock down their 3D printers more. Bamboo already has authorization control requirements, as I went over in that wiki article. Orca Slicer has refused to adapt to this. They said this is unnecessary and of no benefit to its users. So if you want to be able to use this, you must be using the older firmware, to my knowledge. Please do correct me if I'm wrong there. The K1 series of Cruelty printers, Cruelty. Yeah, Cruelty. That's a good Freudian slip there. The K1 series of Cruelty printers ships with root access removed. The original K1 had it in the settings menu, and the new ones don't. In my experience in Washington State, the senators, I haven't dealt with the House, but the senators are actually quite reasonable. I will link to some of the testimony we've given down below when it comes to right to repair. Marco Lias was very reasonable. Derek Stanford was very reasonable. Many of them were quite reasonable, and they were very open to listening to what it is we had to say. And I really appreciated that about the state of Washington. So here's what I would suggest you do. The first reading is complete. It looks like this is sitting in the House Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee. There are no hearings scheduled. What I would do is, if you live in the state of Washington, is contact the committee members. Focus on the things that really matter here. The criminalization of using open source software on your printer. The fact that there is no end-of-life provision in this at all, which creates massive e-waste. The fact that this is going to be something that affects CNC machines, lathes, and everything else into the future. And don't buy printers that require this. But this is what you could do as a consumer right now. If they've removed root-level access to the 3D printer, don't buy that 3D printer. If it requires an internet connection in order to work, don't buy that 3D printer. Don't accept this. You already have enough. We have an entire website that is filled with nothing but thousands of articles at this point going over every single way you are getting fucked by these companies. We have made enough material for volunteers to write over 1,000 articles when companies try to change the terms of the sale after the sale and make a product obsolete. They do that when they don't have the excuse of safety, when they don't get to hide behind the shield of we're stopping people from getting shot and killed. Don't you care about people being shot and killed, Lewis? They're going to do this here. This is going to be the ultimate excuse. This is the best Trojan horse to turn 3D printers into a device that lasts for 1 to 3 years. Just my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. That's it for today. And as always, I hope you learned something. We're going to do our best to push back against this because I am trying to reform one law that says breaking digital locks on products that you already bought and paid for is illegal. I don't feel like fighting another. See you in the next video. Bye now.